Finally, my ancient bag of metal goodness has arrived in the post, and I can get on with bringing you this tutorial on one of Battletech's sweetest factions. And this has ended up being serendipitously super cool, because not only was the Taurian Concordat probably the faction named by you folks in my comments as one of the most popular, the most favourite, but we also get an opportunity here to tackle a colour that people are often kind of scared of. We're going to be taking our old Ralpatha Shadowhawk and painting it up in the colours of the Pleiades Hussars, which means, of course, one thing. Yellow! And there's a bunch of cheap ways and quick ways and simple ways and all that for doing yellow. I've put out some tutorials on it myself. But what we're going to do today is take our time, slow down, and we're just going to relax. And we're going to do it right. We're going to paint yellow in a way that gives us a ton of control and a ton of agency over the finished look. So let's get stuck in. Getting a good yellow really just relies on painting in ways that promote excellent consistency. And the way I like to start that, and the way I think is very important to start that, is just with a good, solid, flat, full coverage base coat. For our Shadowhawk, I've given it a spray through my airbrush with Citadel's Avalon Sunset. This paint is also available in pots, it's also available in rattle cans, and it's a really good full coverage oxide yellow that even by hand is solid over black in about 3 coats. So if you don't want to airbrush this or rattle can it or whatever, don't dismay, you'll still be able to get solid all over coverage in just a few thin coats. And honestly, that's it for the prep stages. Clean the model up, prime the model, and get it solidly covered in Avalon Sunset. That's it. To shade this yellow, we're going to use a technique called glazing. And you might well be familiar with this technique, but just in case you're not, I'm going to try and give a quick explanation of what we're going to try and do and how we want it to look. The first and probably most important thing to do is not to confuse glazing the technique with Glazes, the product from Games Workshop, the latter of which is just a transparent ink-based kind of product, not massively dissimilar to contrast paints, just a lot thinner. The 4, however, is a painting technique that's been around in general art use for hundreds of years and is a really good way of getting controlled blends on your miniatures, especially for shadowing. To prepare a glaze, what we're basically looking to do is thin down a normally opaque paint to pretty much the thinnest point we can get it before it starts to break up. My favourite description of this is from legendary painter Sam Lenz, who often calls the correct glaze consistency dirty paint water. Once you reach this point by adding more and more water and continuously checking transparency, we start to get some paint on our mini. The rich brown that I'm using here to demonstrate this thinning technique is also the perfect colour to shade our yellow with, so we can get in and start work on our Shadowhawk. The actual application of the glaze is really easy, providing we just obey a couple of important rules. Firstly, we need to make sure that when we load our brush, we're draining pretty much all of the glaze back off so that the brush is just barely damp with it. You can test this on the back of your hand and see that even when the brush looks like it has no paint on it, it'll still continue to deliver quite a bit of glaze. The other really important one is directional application or directional strokes. As glazes go on, the direction we run our stroke in determines the direction of the intensity of the blend. Since a glaze deposits more paint at the end of the stroke than it does at the start of the stroke, we want to ensure that we always run our brush strokes in the direction of the shadows. And by understanding those 2 simple rules, we can now start to build up some lovely blended shadows all over our Shadowhawk. You'll notice here that when the first layer of glaze goes down, it has almost no effect on the colour, and indeed we shouldn't expect to see a nice blend appearing until a few layers have gone down. But eventually, after a nice, slow, relaxing, chilled out session of glazing, we can start to get some really nice looking modulated panels. If your blends don't look smooth enough during this, you can also glaze in the opposite direction using Avalon Sunset, and that's something I had to do here and there on mine. But either way, once that's all done, it could be tempting to dive headlong into highlighting. However, there are a couple of processes that I think we should do first before we go into highlighting. So before we progress any further with our miniature and start highlighting it now, I want to establish a frame of reference so that I can see how much contrast there is in the miniature. This means I want to put the darkest colour I'm going to use in so that I can see how bright the brightest colour I use is against it. So first things first, I like to panel line, and that involves here just using a darker brown than we used previously and thinning it right back and just carefully running it into the deep straight line recesses between panels and things like that. And this is absolutely something that you could do before the glazing if you're worried about going outside of those lines and having to correct things afterwards. But let's just pretend that I'm flexing here and not that I just totally did this in the wrong order. And so the other nice thing to do here to create that contrast is to black in any parts of the mech that you want to be black or metallic. I know some of you like to use a metallic skeleton for your mechs. Personally, I go with black, but either way, black would be the right colour to start with, whether you were going to put a metallic over it or not. So let's get that done as well. Okay, so now we are finally in a spot where it makes sense to start pushing our highlights in. By doing this groundwork first, we can make sure that we don't push the highlights too far though, and make our yellow look washed out. So for my first move, I'm just going to take some of that Avalon Sunset and mix in some Sunny Skin Tone from VA Home Model Colour. Sunny Skin Tone's a bit of a catch-all colour for me. It can do a lot of things well, but it's especially good at lightening colours up without making them look washed out, maintaining some intensity of warmth as they get brighter. And with that lightened yellow, we can use a technique that's pretty similar to glazing really, but just a bit less subtle and a bit faster. Instead of massively thinning the paint right down, we'll just take it down a little thinner than a normal layer, but the way we'll paint with it, we'll use those similar kind of directional strokes that we would to a glaze. And so that's exactly what we'll do now, working in the opposite direction of our shadows, just to create some nice contrast. At the same time as doing this, we can also introduce a few edge highlights as well, if the need takes us. They'll form a good base for later edge highlights to go on top of. And so then from there, we just grab some pure Sunny Skin Tone now and just use it to edge highlight a bit more. Typically with a two-step edge highlight like this, the brighter line either wants to be thinner than the one underneath it, or it wants to start nearer to the point you're trying to accentuate. So just keep that in mind and we'll continue to work through these and get some highlights on. Right, I'm going to jump forward now a little bit to a point where I've finished all of that yellow off and I've also finished highlighting the black parts. And the reason I've skipped those is because I now want to introduce you to the blue tiger stripes that we need to work into this colour scheme. This is the other main part of the scheme. I'm going for something that's pretty similar to this example from Camo Specs by Jal Phoenix. So I want to explain how I'm going to try and achieve that in a really quick and simple way first of all. And to do that I need you to meet two more friends of mine from the VA Home Model colour range. These are Dark Prussian Blue and Blue Green. What's really great about these two colours is that they interact together to form really beautiful shadows, midtones and highlights in a super easy way. They're also really easy to blend, and they really just look great for very little effort. I'm going to mix something on the sort of lighter end of a medium blue to start out with and just start dotting in these tiger stripes, using the side of the tip of my brush mostly and just running onto the tip where I need to. Anywhere that I need a highlight, I'll just mix in a little bit extra of that blue-green and build a highlight into just that part of the stripe. This is a little bit tedious, you have to kind of again go a bit slow and steady, take our time, but let's remember here, Battletech is a low model count game. We can afford to slow down and do things in a slightly more considered way. And then for my final trick, I just added in this sweet reflective visor using a kind of very basic earth sky reflection technique. I'm not putting this into the tutorial because it really is very simple. You can see what I've done here in this close-up. It's just a brown gradient at the bottom and a blue gradient at the top with some white lines painted over it. It's really, really straightforward, and if you want to replicate this very simplified version of it, you probably can. And so there's a whole bunch of cool tips for painting your mechs in general and for also painting Pleiades Hussars. This also happens to be my favourite yellow workup, so I'm definitely hoping that you'll be willing to give this one a try and tell me what you think of it. Just remember to stay patient and to not rush yourself. Glazing lends itself to a sort of slow and purposeful approach. You can do it quickly, but because you always want to wait for those glazes to dry before you put another layer on, it just makes sense to relax and do it slowly and at your own pace. And so with that, we can pull things to a close for another week. Please don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it, to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, and to check the links below in the description if you want to offer your support in additional ways. All that remains now is for me to say thank you so much for watching, folks, and I will see you in the next one. Good luck with these techniques, they are really, really good fun. Bye bye for now.